My sister sold her home to fund a freedom adventure. Now my parents expect me to house her family of 4 for nothing. I refused. They created their own chaos, and now they're trapped living in it. Can you truly stand by and watch your own flesh and blood, your sister, gamble away her children's future on an Instagram-fueled fantasy? Or is there a point where family demands you draw a line, even if it shatters everything you thought you knew about loyalty and love? My Chicago condo, usually a sanctuary of calm and order high above Lake Michigan, felt heavy that day. The typically crisp air now thick with the unspoken dread of an impending call, the kind that promised to unravel my meticulously built life. My name is Eleanor Campbell, and at 34, I've painstakingly built my life brick by brick in Chicago. I have a stable career as a financial advisor, a cozy condo overlooking the magnificent lake, and enough savings to truly feel secure at night. My sister, Chloe, always seemed to choose a completely different path, but even I wasn't prepared for the sheer audacity of her decision, selling her family's home for a freedom tour across America. What truly floored me, what felt like a direct punch to the gut, was my parents' call last week, nonchalantly expecting me to house Chloe's entire family of 4, indefinitely, and for free. My jaw practically hit the floor. Growing up, responsibility wasn't just a trait. It felt tattooed onto my very personality, inked deep before I could even spell the word. While other 10-year-olds reveled in Saturday morning cartoons, I meticulously tracked every penny of my allowance in a Lisa Frank notebook. By 13, I was the neighborhood's go-to babysitter, carefully saving most of what I earned. High school saw me working at a local bookstore, and throughout college, I waited tables, all while maintaining a demanding scholarship. Every single penny I earned had a purpose, a destination. After graduation, as my friends splurged on European adventures and chasing fleeting experiences, I was diligently building my emergency fund, saving for that crucial down payment on my condo. Chloe, 2 years my junior, couldn't have been more different. She floated through life on a cloud of charm and pure impulse. Her bedroom was a permanent clothing explosion, a chaotic monument to fleeting trends. Homework? It magically materialized minutes before class, usually looking like it had fought a losing battle with a crumpled backpack. Her college fund, a carefully saved nest egg, drained midway through sophomore year when she decided to follow some new boyfriend to a music festival in another state. Yet, somehow, her seemingly careless approach to life rarely seemed to yield consequences that actually stuck. "Oh, Chloe's just finding herself," my mother would say with a soft sigh, as she wrote yet another check to cover my sister's rent after Chloe had quit another job to pursue her passion. This time, it was pottery. Before that, photography. Before that, a yoga instructor. None of these passions lasted more than a few fleeting months. Meanwhile, my father would just shrug helplessly. "She's got her mother's free spirit," he'd murmur, the unspoken implication hanging heavy in the air. I, Eleanor, had inherited his practical nature, portrayed as somehow less vibrant, less interesting, certainly less worthy of parental indulgence. When Chloe met Daniel at 25, our entire family breathed a collective sigh of relief so profound it echoed. Daniel seemed grounded. An electrician with a steady income, a sensible career. Their wedding was small, intimate, and lovely, though I ended up quietly covering half the costs when Chloe's elaborate plans inevitably exceeded their modest budget. I justified it to myself. "It's an investment in her stability, Eleanor. It's for the best." A year later, little Zoe arrived, a beautiful, bright spot in our lives. Finn followed 2 years after that. My niece and nephew quickly became the undeniable highlights of our family gatherings. Smart, funny, and surprisingly resilient, they somehow thrived despite the constant undercurrent of chaos that often swirled around Chloe and Daniel's household. I adored them fiercely, so much so that I quietly set up education funds for both of them, despite Chloe's inevitable eye-rolling about living in the moment. 3 years ago, when Chloe and Daniel finally purchased a modest 3-bedroom home in the suburbs, I felt a genuine surge of happiness. Perhaps motherhood had finally anchored her, I thought. The house wasn't fancy, but it had a real backyard for the kids and good schools nearby. For the very first time, My sister truly seemed to embrace responsibility. "You should see Zoe's room, Ellie," she'd called excitedly after they moved in, using my family nickname. "We painted it purple, just like she wanted, and Finn's got so much space for all his dinosaurs." The genuine pride in her voice made me hopeful. My own life continued on its steady, predictable path. As a financial advisor, I found satisfaction in helping others secure their futures, all while diligently building my own. I dated occasionally, but hadn't met anyone compelling enough to rearrange my carefully constructed life for. My condo, a 2-bedroom with a dedicated home office overlooking Lake Michigan, remained my sanctuary. Clean lines, organized spaces, everything in its precise place. Our family fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sunday dinners at our parents' house every other week, birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings. Beneath that placid surface, however, the old dynamics stubbornly persisted. When Chloe needed last-minute childcare, I'd inevitably rearrange client meetings to help. When their refrigerator died, I loaned them money for a new one, knowing deep down I'd likely never see that money again. When Daniel's truck needed repairs, I researched affordable mechanics and drove him to the shop myself. Each time, the same frustrating pattern emerged. Chloe would make a poor choice, find herself in a bind. Our parents would apply subtle but intense pressure for me to step in, and I would, reluctantly, to maintain the fragile family peace. My resentment grew, a slow, simmering burn, but I buried it deep beneath a lifetime of practiced accommodation. 6 months ago, I finally started therapy. Dr. Hayes, with her calm demeanor and insightful questions, helped me recognize my enabling patterns and gently encouraged boundary-setting exercises. "Your sister's emergencies aren't automatically your responsibility, Eleanor," she'd remind me each session. I'd nod, listening, but implementing those boundaries felt like trying to speak a foreign language I'd never truly learned. Around the same time, I started noticing a distinct shift in Chloe's social media. Her Instagram feed, once a mix of family photos and home decoration projects, began to feature an entirely new aesthetic, vans converted into tiny, impossibly chic homes. Sun-kissed couples posing effortlessly beside national park signs. Families cooking meals on portable stoves next to crystal-clear lakes, all under the banner of van life. "Don't you ever get tired of being in the same place every single day?" she asked me during a family barbecue, her phone perpetually in hand, scrolling through another perfect van life account. "Not really," I answered honestly, the scent of grilling burgers filling the air. "I actually like my routines. They bring me a lot of peace." She looked at me then with something that looked suspiciously like pity. "That's so sad, Ellie. There's a whole world out there." I bit back the retort, the sharp words about being well aware of the world's existence, about simply choosing stability over spontaneity, a choice that had served me incredibly well. Instead, I asked about the kids' summer plans, carefully steering us toward safer, shallower conversational waters. Looking back, I should have recognized those seemingly innocent comments as blaring warning flares. But I couldn't possibly imagine that my sister, now a mother of 2 school-age children, with a mortgage and community ties, would actually act on her restless scrolling. A part of me still stubbornly believed that adult responsibilities had finally tethered her to reality. I was catastrophically wrong. The announcement came during Sunday dinner 3 months ago. My parents had prepared their famous lasagna, the good china, usually reserved for special occasions, suddenly appearing on the table. I should have recognized the setup. "We have some exciting news," Chloe announced, gripping Daniel's hand. He offered a tight, strained smile, a muscle jumping almost imperceptibly in his jaw. "We've listed our house for sale." The dining room fell into an immediate, deafening silence, broken only by the faint clatter of my fork against my plate, as if echoing the tremor through the room. "Are you moving to a bigger place?" my father asked, his voice laced with a desperate, hopeful lilt. Chloe's face lit up with an almost manic, unsettling excitement. "We're hitting the road. We're done with the suburban prison, the mortgage, the soul-crushing monotony, the routine." "What about the kids' school?" I asked, my gaze falling on Zoe and Finn, who were uncharacteristically quiet, pushing pasta around their plates with disinterest. "Oh, we're going to road school them," Chloe said dismissively, waving a hand. "They'll learn more seeing the Grand Canyon than sitting at a desk memorizing useless facts." My mother, after an initial moment of mild concern, shifted gears with remarkable speed, pivoting to unbridled enthusiasm. "How wonderful! What an adventure for the children." She turned to my father. "Remember when we talked about doing something like this, before we had the girls?" My father nodded, though I couldn't recall them ever mentioning such audacious plans. "Where will you live?" he asked, trying to sound supportive. "We're getting a van," Chloe exclaimed, her eyes gleaming. "One of those Mercedes Sprinters, fully converted with a kitchenette and sleeping spaces for all of us. We'll follow the good weather, take odd jobs along the way if needed, but mostly, we'll just exist. Truly live, you know." I glanced at Daniel. He was studying his wine glass with an intensity one hadn't seen him apply to anything since he wired my new dimmer switch. After dinner, while Chloe excitedly showed our parents Pinterest boards of custom van conversions on her tablet, I cornered him in the quiet of the kitchen. "Are you really on board with this?" I asked quietly, my voice barely a whisper. His shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of the situation visibly pressing down on him. "It's what Chloe wants. But what about what you want?" I pressed, my voice tight. "What about what's best for the kids?" He sighed, running a weary hand through his hair. "She says we're all trapped in societal expectations, that the kids are being programmed for corporate slavery." He lowered his voice even further. "Honestly, I think she's just bored. And seeing all these perfect Instagram families living authentic lives has her convinced we're missing out on something." "And your job?" I pressed, incredulous. "Your stable, well-paying job?" "I'm supposed to find temporary work along the way. Electricians can find gigs anywhere." He didn't sound convinced, not even a little. "Have you made a budget for this plan? Calculated emergency funds? What about healthcare?" Daniel's uncomfortable expression told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. "Chloe says we're overthinking it. That everything will work out if we just trust the universe. He made cynical air quotes, visible frustration etched on his face. Before I could respond, Chloe bounded into the kitchen, her voice bright, almost too bright. "What are you two whispering about?" "Just catching up," I lied smoothly, meeting Daniel's grateful glance. The house sold with alarming speed in the hot market, netting them a full $40,000 above the asking price. That was enough for a significant cushion if managed properly. But instead of setting aside emergency funds or securing temporary housing while converting a reasonably priced van, Chloe went all in. She documented every single step on social media, of course. The custom Mercedes Sprinter van itself cost nearly $60,000 before conversions. Another $30,000 went into building it out with bamboo paneling, solar panels, a composting toilet, and custom cabinetry. Each upgrade was showcased with gleaming Instagram posts, carefully curated with hashtags like #vanlife, #freedomjourney, #escapingthematrix. But the children's faces in these carefully filtered photos often told a different story. Zoe, usually so animated and expressive, appeared withdrawn, her smile forced. Finn clung protectively to his dinosaur collection, which had been ruthlessly pared down to just 3 small plastic figures that could fit in the van's minimal storage. I tried raising my concerns during a coffee meetup, my voice gentle, trying to avoid sounding accusatory. "Have you thought about schooling materials? Medical emergencies in remote areas? What happens if the van breaks down, Chloe?" She waved away my questions with a dismissive hand. "You're such a worrier, Ellie. That's why you're stuck in that corporate hamster wheel. We'll figure things out as they come. That's the beauty of this lifestyle." "But the kids need stability, structure," I insisted, a knot tightening in my stomach. "That's just programming talking," she countered, her voice taking on the oddly rehearsed quality of someone quoting their favorite influencers. "Kids thrive on new experiences. They're adaptable. Our ancestors were nomads, you know. Our ancestors also had significantly shorter lifespans and few educational requirements for survival," I thought to myself, but wisely didn't say. When Daniel quit his stable job just 2 weeks before their departure, reality truly began setting in for me. He'd worked for the same electrical company for 6 years, building seniority and benefits, all abandoned for living in the moment. My parents threw them a farewell party, complete with a cake shaped like their new van. Friends and extended family gathered, toasting their courage and vision. I stood in the corner, nursing a glass of wine, feeling like the only sane person in a collective delusion. "Aren't you proud of your sister?" my mother asked, sidling up beside me, her eyes sparkling. "Taking control of her life like this?" "It seems less like taking control and more like abandoning responsibility," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral. Her expression hardened instantly. "Not everyone wants to live a boring, safe life like you, Eleanor. Some people need more than spreadsheets and retirement plans to feel fulfilled." The word stung, a sharp, unexpected pain, more than I cared to admit. Was my life boring? Was stability such a character flaw? I'd built everything I had through careful planning and hard work, yet somehow, I was being positioned as the family failure for not chasing implausible dreams and Instagram aesthetics. As they pulled away in their gleaming new van 2 days later, Zoe's small, wistful face pressed against the window, I felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. This won't end well, I thought. And somehow, I suspected I would be expected to pick up the pieces when it inevitably all fell apart. The first month of Chloe's Freedom Tour unfolded across my social media feed like a glossy travel magazine spread. Sunrise yoga beside mountain lakes. The children's faces shining with genuine delight as they spotted wild horses in Wyoming. Glamorous campsite dinners, fairy lights strung across the van's awning, painting everything in a magical glow. Each image meticulously filtered and captioned with inspirational quotes about escaping societal constraints. Maybe I was wrong, I admitted during a therapy session with Dr. Hayes. "They seem happy." She tilted her head, a gentle, knowing look in her eyes. "Social media rarely shows the complete picture, Eleanor. How are they really doing?" I shrugged, a weary sigh escaping my lips. "Chloe texts occasionally. Short messages about amazing views and life-changing experiences. Nothing substantial." "And the children?" Dr. Hayes probed. I paused, chewing on my lip. "She hasn't let me talk to them directly. Says they're too busy living in the present." Dr. Hayes made a non-committal sound, then looked at me directly. "Keep the lines of communication open. Be there when they need you, not if." Her words proved prophetic, sooner than I could have ever expected. 6 weeks into the journey, the carefully curated social media facade began showing its first real cracks. Posts became less frequent, the jubilant captions gaining an undeniable, defensive edge. Van life isn't always glamorous, but we're not tourists. "We're living this," Chloe wrote beneath a photo of a cramped interior. Clothes hung everywhere, dishes piled precariously in the tiny sink. Comments from her followers, once admiring, began to shift to concerned. "Where are the kids going to school?" someone asked. Chloe's reply was a vague, lengthy paragraph about world schooling and experiential learning that conspicuously avoided mentioning any actual educational materials or a schedule. The mechanical problems started in Colorado. The expensive van, it turned out, required equally expensive repairs. Minor setback. Van life reality, Chloe posted beside an image of the van at a specialty shop. The post, of course, didn't mention the $3,000 bill that accompanied the repair. But my father, bless his inability to keep a secret, let it slip during our weekly phone call. "They're just finding their footing," he said defensively when I expressed my concern. "All new ventures have startup costs." This venture consumed their house and their life savings, I wanted to point out, but held my tongue. Instead, I asked, "How are Zoe and Finn adjusting?" A pause. "They miss their friends," he admitted, his voice a little softer. "School started last week, and Zoe's been asking about her teacher from last year." My heart sank. "Are they following any curriculum at all?" I pressed gently. "Chloe says they're learning geography firsthand," my father replied, but his usual certainty sounded hollow, a fragile echo. The first desperate call came at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. I'd been asleep for an hour when Chloe's ringtone jolted me awake, a discordant sound in the quiet of my apartment. "Ellie?" Her voice sounded small, thin, the background noise suggesting she was huddled somewhere outside the van. "We're having some money issues." I sat up fully alert, adrenaline coursing through me. "What kind of issues?" "The van needed another repair, and campgrounds are way more expensive than we budgeted for, and gas prices are insane." She paused, then, with a barely audible sigh, "Could you maybe loan us a couple thousand? Just until Daniel finds more consistent work." My thoughts raced, my mind instantly picturing Zoe and Finn. "Where are you now?" "Some tiny town in Utah. There's not much work here, but we can't afford to drive to a bigger city until payday. And that's still 10 days away." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, my financial advisor brain kicking in. "I'm happy to look over your budget and help you make a plan, Chloe, but I'm not comfortable just sending money without addressing the underlying issues." Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. "You've got plenty of money," she finally said, her voice hardening, laced with resentment. "But fine. Forget I asked." "Chloe, that's not what I meant," I rushed to say, my frustration rising. "I want to help, but just throwing money at the problem won't solve anything long-term." "We don't need your financial advisor lecture." "We need help," she snapped, before hanging up abruptly. The next day, she posted a sunset photo with the caption, "Some people will never understand the value of freedom over material security. Their loss. No regrets. Trust the journey." I knew, with a sinking certainty, that the barb was aimed squarely at me. What she didn't share online was that our parents had transferred $1,500 to her account that very same day. Money they could ill afford on their fixed retirement income. Daniel found sporadic work in the weeks that followed, a day helping wire a hunting cabin, 3 days at a small construction site. Never enough for stability, barely enough for necessities. Their social media presence grew increasingly desperate beneath a forced veneer of positivity. Embracing minimalism means appreciating simple meals. Rice and beans again. #grateful, Chloe posted beside a photo of the children eating meager meals from paper bowls, their small faces devoid of the usual cheer. Video calls with my parents offered increasingly clearer glimpses into the deteriorating situation. In the background, I could often hear Chloe and Daniel arguing, hushed but angry voices bickering about money, about roots, about whose idea this whole disastrous journey had been in the first place. Zoe appeared in the corner of one call, her hair unwashed, clutching a tattered workbook. "How's school, sweetheart?" I asked when my parents stepped away momentarily, my heart aching for her. Her eyes filled with tears, spilling over. "I miss Miss Peterson," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mom says we're doing road school, but..." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "We mostly just drive around while she takes pictures." Before I could respond, Chloe swooped in, whisking her away with a resentful glare at the camera. The weather turned against them as October arrived. Their grand plan to follow the sunshine collided head-on with brutal budget constraints and skyrocketing fuel costs. Cold nights in the van required propane heating, yet another expense they hadn't adequately prepared for. Instagram posts, now rare, showed them huddled in blankets, pretending that shivering was a charming aspect of their authentic journey. My parents called more frequently, their voices strained with worry. "They just need to get through this adjustment period," my mother insisted, though with rapidly diminishing conviction. Each call ended with not-so-subtle hints about my comfortable condo, with its extra bedroom, going to waste. I held firm, steeling myself. They made a choice. They need to find their own solutions. "Family helps family," Eleanor, my father countered, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I'm happy to help them create a budget, find affordable housing, or look for job opportunities," I replied, feeling my own frustration rise. "But I'm not an emergency shelter." Deep down, though, I worried incessantly about Zoe and Finn. They hadn't asked for this upheaval, this crushing instability. During the rare moments I glimpsed them on video calls, they looked tired, subdued, mere shadows of the vibrant children I'd known. As November approached, Chloe's carefully constructed freedom narrative completely unraveled. Her posts grew even rarer, the tone bitter, resentful. People glamorize van life, but don't talk about the constant judgment from conformists who can't understand choosing experience over possessions. Still no regrets. The accompanying photo showed a bleak parking lot at dusk, not the majestic scenery that had once dominated her feed. Reading between the lines, I sensed the Freedom Tour was circling the drain rapidly. Daniel and Chloe's marriage was visibly straining, their arguments more frequent, their affection all but gone. The children were falling dangerously behind educationally and socially. Money was critically short, and winter was coming, making their living situation increasingly untenable. I braced myself for the crash I knew was imminent, a sickening dread twisting in my gut. It arrived sooner and more catastrophically than even my worst predictions. The van died in dramatic fashion outside a small, forgotten town in Nevada. Not just a minor repair this time, but a catastrophic transmission failure. According to Chloe's tearful, frantic call to our parents, Daniel had apparently been warning about strange noises for weeks, but they couldn't afford to stop for diagnostics. Now they were truly stranded. The van limped its last miles to a specialized repair shop, where the news went from bad to worse. $12,000, my mother gasped during our three-way call, the shock palpable in her voice. How is that possible? She whimpered. It's a Mercedes with custom everything, Mom, I reminded her, biting back the urge to say I warned them about this very scenario. We don't have that kind of money, my father said, his voice laced with defeat. We already sent them most of our emergency fund last month. While my parents discussed tapping into their retirement savings, a dangerous, reckless move at their age, I asked the most practical question. Where are they staying now? Some motel called the Sunset Inn, my mother replied, her voice flat. $49 a night, but that adds up quickly. I did the mental math. With repairs that would take at least 2 weeks, plus basic living expenses, plus eventual gas money to go somewhere, they were looking at a financial hole too deep to climb out of alone. Maybe it's time they consider selling the van for parts and finding a more sustainable living situation, I suggested, trying to be rational. My mother gasped, as if I'd proposed abandoning the children in the desert. They can't give up on their dream. Mom, the dream is already gone, I stated, my voice firm. They're stuck in a motel in Nevada with no money and no plan. That evening, I received a call directly from Chloe. Her voice sounded raw, utterly defeated, in a way I'd never heard before. You were right, she admitted, the words clearly difficult, almost tearing at her. This was a mistake. All of it. I sat down, shocked by the admission. Tell me what's happening, I urged, my voice softening. The story poured out, punctuated by heartbreaking sobs. Their last few $100s gone to the motel and food. Daniel working a temporary construction job that barely covered daily expenses, let alone the massive repair bill. The van essentially worthless without fixing the transmission. Debt accumulating rapidly on their single remaining credit card. The children missing months of proper education. Zoe developing anxiety, withdrawn and fearful. Finn having nightmares, wetting the bed again. I ruined everything, she whispered, the words choked. Our house. The kids' stability. Daniel's job. For once, I didn't offer solutions or say, I told you so. What do you want to do now? I don't know, she admitted, her voice hollow. Daniel says we should sell the van for whatever we can get, find the cheapest apartment somewhere, and start over. But that feels like admitting total failure. It's not failure to recognize when something isn't working, Chloe, I said gently. It takes immense courage to change course. But we can't afford first and last month's rent anywhere decent, she argued, a fresh wave of despair in her voice. And without Daniel's steady job history this past few months, no one will rent to us anyway. Her voice cracked. The kids deserve better than this. I suggested practical steps. Sell the van. Find temporary housing. Look for places with a lower cost of living where Daniel's skills would be in demand. Create a strict budget to rebuild savings. I can't do it, Chloe said after a long, agonizing pause. I can't give up yet. We just need to fix the van and find somewhere warmer for winter. By spring, we'll figure something out. The stubborn denial in her voice concerned me more than the situation itself. And how will you pay for the repairs? I asked, my voice flat. The universe will provide, she said with desperate conviction. It has to. Apparently, Chloe's version of the universe was our parents. The next day, I discovered they'd maxed out their credit card to help with the van repairs. Money they absolutely couldn't afford to spend, plunging themselves into debt at a stage of life when they should have been financially secure. We had no choice, my father defended, his voice strained when I confronted them. Those are our grandchildren, stranded out there. There were other choices, I countered, my anger simmering, practical ones that didn't involve throwing good money after bad. You've always been so hard on your sister, my mother said, her voice sharp with accusation. Not everyone has your financial privileges. I bit back the retort, the burning truth that my privileges were the result of a decade of careful decisions and delayed gratification. Instead, I asked, what happens when the van breaks down again? Or when winter makes living in it impossible? This isn't sustainable. Well, my mother began, not quite meeting my eyes, a new, unsettling note in her voice. We were thinking, your condo has that spare bedroom and home office. If you converted the office to a bedroom, there would be space for all of them, temporarily. I stared at the phone in disbelief, my breath catching in my throat. You want Chloe's family of 4 to live in my 2-bedroom condo for how long? Just until they get back on their feet, my father jumped in, his voice suddenly enthusiastic. 3 months, maybe 6 at most. And who suggested this idea? I asked, though a cold dread was already forming in my stomach. I knew exactly who. My mother hesitated. Chloe mentioned it might be a possibility and you told her it was? I pressed, my voice low and dangerous. Another pause. We might have indicated you'd be open to the discussion. The cold dread solidified into a block of ice in my chest. Have you already told her this is happening? The silence stretched, telling its own damning story. You promised her they could stay with me without even asking me first? I fought to keep my voice level, to keep the tremor out of it. Family helps family. Eleanor, my father said firmly, reverting to his stock phrase. You have the space and means to help your sister through this rough patch. It's not a rough patch, I shot back, my patience snapping. It's the predictable outcome of a series of terrible decisions. And my condo can barely fit me comfortably when I'm working from home, let alone 5 additional people. So, your comfort matters more than your niece and nephew having a roof over their heads? My mother's voice dripped with disappointment, the manipulation so blatant it momentarily left me speechless. When I finally found my voice again, it was colder, sharper. I asked one final, cutting question. When are they planning to arrive? They're getting the van back tomorrow, my father said, almost cheerily, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. If they drive straight through, probably Saturday morning, 3 days from now. They had decided. My entire life would be completely upended in 3 days, without consultation or consent. I need to go, I said flatly, ending the call before they could respond, before I said something I truly regretted. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened, my world tilting on its axis. Then I did something I'd never done before, something utterly out of character. I typed out a text message to our family group chat, which included Chloe, Daniel, and our parents. We need to have an emergency family discussion. Video call tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern. Everyone must attend. This is non-negotiable. At precisely 7 o'clock the next evening, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, my hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through me. One by one, the video squares populated. My parents in their living room, looking apprehensive, shifting uncomfortably. Daniel in what appeared to be a cramped motel bathroom, presumably seeking some shred of privacy. Chloe appeared last, her face set in a familiar expression of defensive entitlement. Thanks for making time for this, I began formally, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so. We need to address some miscommunications and set clear expectations. If this is about us staying with you, Chloe jumped in, her voice too bright, too quick. We promise we won't be in your way. The kids can share the office, Daniel and I can take the spare room. We'll be super quiet during your work hours. The casual presumption, the sheer audacity, stole my breath momentarily. She spoke as if the arrangement was already settled, just missing a few minor details. Actually, Chloe, I said, Finding my voice and holding it firm, that's exactly what we need to discuss. I want to be absolutely clear that I never agreed to this arrangement. I was informed yesterday that you all made this plan without consulting me, without even a single conversation. My mother's face flushed a deep crimson. Eleanor, now isn't the time for selfishness. Your sister's family needs help. I'm happy to help in ways that make sense, I replied evenly, meeting her gaze through the screen. But having 5 people move indefinitely into my small condo isn't realistic, it's not reasonable, and it's certainly not a sustainable solution. Chloe's expression darkened, her composure slipping. You have 2 bedrooms plus an office in downtown Chicago, and you're claiming there's not enough space? Do you know what we've been living in for months? Yes, Chloe, I do, I shot back, my voice gaining an edge. A van that you chose to live in after selling a perfectly good house. And my condo is 1,200 square feet total. The second bedroom barely fits a full-size bed, and my office is 8 by 10 feet. It's not designed for a family of 4, let alone my work needs. We don't need luxury, Daniel interjected, looking profoundly uncomfortable, clearly trying to mediate. Just somewhere to regroup. I nodded at him, softening my tone slightly. I understand that, Daniel, but even basic logistics make this impossible. Where would everyone sleep? Where would 6 people eat, day in and day out? How would I conduct client video meetings with children running around in the background? And who would pay for the massive increase in utilities, food, and all the other expenses? We thought you'd cover that, temporarily, my father said, his voice hesitant, given your financial position compared to theirs. I took a deep breath, counting to 3. Let me make sure I understand. You expect me to surrender my private space, my work environment, and my financial resources to support a situation created entirely by Chloe and Daniel's choices? To bankroll the consequences of an avoidable disaster. That's what family does, my mother insisted, her face pinched with anger. No, Mom, I countered, shaking my head slowly. Family supports each other through unforeseeable hardships and genuine emergencies. This situation was entirely foreseeable, and it was repeatedly warned against. Chloe's face contorted, her voice rising in pitch. You've always been so judgmental. Just because I didn't want to be trapped in a soul-crushing routine like you doesn't make my choices wrong. Your choices aren't wrong because they're different, Chloe, I said carefully, choosing my words with precision. They're problematic because they were financially unsustainable and they completely disregarded your children's needs for stability. You don't have children. Chloe shot back, her voice venomous. You have no idea what they need. I know they need consistent education, reliable healthcare, social interaction with peers, and adults they can rely on to make responsible decisions, I stated, looking directly at her. And right now, you and Daniel aren't providing those things. How dare you question our parenting? Chloe's voice rose sharply, bordering on a scream. My father intervened, his voice strained. Let's all calm down. Eleanor, you have plenty of space and money. Would sharing temporarily really be such a hardship compared to what they're going through? It's not about hardship comparison, Dad, I explained, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice. It's about enabling destructive patterns versus helping create sustainable solutions. You just don't want to be inconvenienced, my mother said dismissively, her voice dripping with disdain. Something snapped inside me then. Years of accumulated resentment, of being the dutiful, responsible one, finally found its voice. Inconvenienced? Let's talk about inconvenience. Was it an inconvenience when I co-signed Chloe's first apartment lease because she had no credit and then covered 3 months' rent when she quit her job to find herself? Was it an inconvenience when I paid for half her wedding because she and Daniel spent their savings on a spontaneous trip to Bali? Was it an inconvenience when I set up education funds for Zoe and Finn because neither of you, I looked at my parents, bothered planning for their future? The screen fell silent. My parents' faces were shocked, mouths slightly agape. Chloe's expression was frozen in disbelief. Daniel looked down, his shoulders slumping even further. I have helped, repeatedly, for years, I continued, my voice trembling now with the force of my long-suppressed anger. I've given money I knew I'd never see again. I've provided childcare at a moment's notice. I've researched solutions for every single crisis. And each time, the pattern repeats itself because there are never any real consequences for poor choices. Daniel cleared his throat, a small, tentative sound. Eleanor's right. Chloe's head whipped toward him, off-screen, a sharp, disbelieving what escaping her lips. She's right, he repeated, louder now, a new firmness entering his voice. We've been making terrible decisions, and everyone's been cushioning the fall. Mostly Chloe's decisions, if I'm honest. Daniel. Chloe gasped, betrayal etched on her face. It's time for truth, he continued, his voice steady. Eleanor, the transmission wouldn't have failed if we'd gotten it checked when I first noticed problems. But Chloe spent that money on unnecessary things instead. What unnecessary things? My father asked, his voice barely a whisper, a horrified realization dawning on him. Daniel looked pained, clearly wrestling with loyalty and honesty. A $300 sunrise yoga workshop in Sedona. Designer clothes for her Instagram posts. A 2-night stay at a luxury glamping resort just so she could get photos for her followers. My parents stared in disbelief, their faces pale. Is this true, Chloe? My mother asked, her voice faltering. You're twisting everything. Chloe hissed at Daniel, her eyes blazing. Those experiences were investments in our brand. We were going to monetize the journey eventually. The journey is over, Daniel said flatly, his gaze fixed on Chloe, unwavering. We need to focus on rebuilding some kind of stability for the kids. An uncomfortable, heavy silence fell over the video call. Finally, I spoke again, my voice softer now, having made my point. I'm willing to help in ways that make sense. I can contribute toward a security deposit for an apartment in an affordable area. I can help create a budget for rebuilding your finances. I can connect Daniel with job opportunities through my professional network. But I cannot and will not let you move into my home. So, you're abandoning us? Chloe accused, tears beginning to well in her eyes. No, Chloe, I'm refusing to enable another poor decision, I clarified, my voice calm but unyielding. There are realistic solutions here, but turning my condo into an overcrowded boarding house isn't one of them. My mother's face hardened, her previous shock replaced by icy disapproval. If you turn your back on your sister now, Eleanor, don't expect us to forgive you. Family stands together in crisis. This ultimatum works both ways, Mom, I replied steadily, meeting her gaze. If you insist that real family support means sacrificing my home, my privacy, and my financial security without question, then perhaps we have different definitions of what family means. Are you threatening to cut us off? My father asked, incredulously, truly stunned by my defiance. I'm setting a boundary, I clarified, my voice clear and unwavering. I love you all, but I won't be emotionally blackmailed into decisions that aren't viable for anyone involved. Let's end this call, my mother said coldly, her face a mask of hurt and anger. Clearly, your sister's welfare means nothing to you. Before I could respond, their video square vanished. Chloe followed suit with a furious click, her image replaced by a black box. Only Daniel remained. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. For what it's worth, Eleanor, I think you're right. Then his square disappeared, too, leaving me alone in my kitchen, shaking with adrenaline and a whirlwind of raw emotion. I closed my laptop and walked to the window overlooking the dark, vast expanse of Lake Michigan, city lights reflecting on its surface like scattered jewels. For the first time in my adult life, I had directly refused my family's expectations, stood my ground against their emotional manipulation. The liberation felt hollow, tangled with grief and doubt. Had I done the right thing? Was I a terrible sister and aunt for refusing to sacrifice everything? The familiar voice of guilt whispered that good family members don't calculate costs. They simply give without limit. But another voice, newer and still uncertain, countered. True support means helping people find sustainable solutions, not temporary bailouts that perpetuate destructive cycles. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and finally allowed myself to cry, the tears a torrent of relief and sorrow. The next morning, I called Dr. Hayes' office and secured an emergency session. Sitting in her calm, plant-filled office, I described the confrontation and its messy aftermath, the bitter accusations, the profound silence. I keep wondering if I'm the villain here, I concluded, my voice barely a whisper. Dr. Hayes considered this thoughtfully, her gaze steady. Setting boundaries often feels like villainy when you've been conditioned to self-sacrifice. But consider this. Would enabling their plan, moving them into your home, truly help anyone long-term? The kids would have stable housing at least, I offered weakly, still struggling with the guilt. In a cramped space not designed for children, with parents whose relationship is clearly strained, and an aunt whose resentment would inevitably grow, she raised an eyebrow, completing my unspoken thought. That doesn't sound very stable or healthy for anyone involved, does it? Her validation helped, a fragile balm, but I still felt a crushing responsibility to find some solution. After our session, instead of returning to work, I parked myself at a coffee shop, laptop open, and began researching. First, I looked into affordable housing options near the Nevada town where they were stranded. Rental prices, I discovered, were actually quite reasonable, especially compared to Chicago. I compiled a list of two-bedroom apartments ranging from $850 to $1,100 monthly, all within reasonable distance of construction sites where Daniel might find steady work. Next, I drafted a realistic financial recovery plan. If they sold the van, even at a significant loss, they could cover a security deposit and first month's rent. Daniel's current construction job could cover basic expenses while he searched for something permanent. Chloe could find part-time work once the children were enrolled in school. I estimated they could achieve basic stability within 2 months and begin rebuilding savings within 6. I hesitated before the next step, then decided directness was necessary. I texted Daniel, "Can we talk privately? I have some ideas that might help." His response came an hour later, motel lobby, 8 p.m. your time. Chloe takes the kids to the pool. That evening, connected via video, Daniel looked utterly exhausted, but more resolute than I'd seen him in months. "How bad is it?" I asked, cutting to the chase. He ran a hand over his face, a raw vulnerability in his eyes. "Worse than anyone knows. We're down to nothing. Your parents' money fixed the van, but we can barely afford this motel another 3 days. Chloe's still talking about finding somewhere to park the van for winter, but..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "But it's not realistic," I finished for him, my voice gentle. "None of this has been realistic," he admitted, his gaze distant. I knew it from the start, but Chloe was so convinced it would work, that we'd somehow join these picture-perfect van life families she follows online. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Turns out those people all have trust funds or remote tech jobs paying 6 figures. How are Zoe and Finn?" I asked, my heart aching. His expression crumpled slightly. "They're troopers, but they're suffering, Eleanor. Zoe cries at night when she thinks we're asleep. Finn started wetting the bed again. They need stability, not another wild scheme." I nodded, then shared my research. As I outlined the potential apartments and the financial plan, I watched hope cautiously return to his face, a flicker of light in his weary eyes. "This could actually work," he said slowly, almost reverently. "But Chloe will never agree. She sees returning to conventional living as personal failure." "What about your marriage, Daniel?" I asked gently, knowing I was treading on fragile ground. He was quiet for a long moment, the weight of his thoughts heavy in the air. "Honestly, I don't know if it can survive this. She blames me for not believing hard enough in the dream. I resent her for pressuring me into something I knew was irresponsible." He sighed heavily. "But right now, the kids have to come first." "I agree," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "And I want to help make that happen. I can cover the security deposit and first month's rent on one of these apartments, not alone. A gift for Zoe and Finn." Relief washed over his face, profound and overwhelming. "Eleanor, that would be... I don't know how to thank you. You can thank me by getting those kids back into a stable situation," I said firmly. "And by standing your ground, if Chloe pushes for another unsustainable plan." He nodded, a new determination in his expression, a spark of resolve I hadn't seen before. "I will. I've been too passive for too long." Over the next 2 days, Daniel and I maintained discreet communication, a quiet alliance forming between us. He researched the apartments on my list, eventually selecting a modest 2-bedroom in a decent school district. The property manager, moved by their story, agreed to expedite the application. Meanwhile, I transferred funds for the deposit and first month's rent, plus a small buffer for immediate necessities. Daniel found a courage I hadn't known he possessed. He informed Chloe that he was taking the construction job permanently, that the children needed to return to traditional schooling, and that he'd secured housing for them all. The van, he added, would be sold to a specialty dealer who'd already made an offer, providing enough to cover basic furnishings and essentials for the apartment. She can join us in building a stable life, or she can continue the journey alone. He texted me after their confrontation. Her choice, but the kids stay with me either way. I wasn't privy to their full conversation, nor did I need to be. The outcome spoke volumes. Chloe, faced with the stark reality of potentially losing her children, reluctantly agreed to the plan, though she made it clear she considered it a temporary, humiliating setback. With one crisis addressed, I turned my attention to my parents. They hadn't spoken to me since the video call, their silence a familiar, passive-aggressive punishment technique. After considerable thought, I drove to their house unannounced one Sunday afternoon. My mother opened the door, her surprise quickly masked by an icy coolness. "Well, this is unexpected. Can I come in? I think we need to talk." She stepped aside wordlessly. My father sat in his recliner, lowering his newspaper slowly as I entered, a stiff, formal greeting on his face. "Eleanor," he acknowledged, his voice tight. I sat on the sofa, hands folded in my lap, feeling the unspoken tension in the air. "I wanted to let you know that Daniel and I have found a solution. They're moving into an apartment next week. The kids will be back in school before Christmas break ends." My mother's eyebrows rose, a hint of disdain in her expression. "Without your sister's input?" "Chloe has agreed to the plan," I said carefully, choosing my words. "Though she's not thrilled about it." "So, you helped when it suited your terms?" my mother said, the accusation clear in her voice. I took a deep breath. "I helped in a way that actually addresses the problem rather than prolonging it. There's a fundamental difference between support and enabling." "Easy for you to say from your perfect life," she snapped, her anger finally bubbling over. "My life isn't perfect, Mom," I countered, my voice firm. "But it is stable because I make responsible choices, and I won't apologize for that anymore." My father cleared his throat, a sound of discomfort. "What exactly did you do to help them?" I explained the apartment, my financial contribution, the job arrangements Daniel had secured. As I spoke, I watched his expression shift from skepticism to reluctant approval. "That's actually quite generous, Eleanor," he admitted, a rare compliment. "It's what I could comfortably give without compromising my own stability," I explained, "which means I can continue to help in the future if necessary, rather than draining my resources all at once." My mother remained unmoved, her face a rigid mask of disapproval. "You still refused to take them in when they needed shelter?" "Because that solution would have created more problems than it solved," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "Mom, I love Chloe and her family, but love doesn't mean having no boundaries." "Boundaries," she repeated the word, her mouth twisting as if it tasted bitter. "In my day, we called that selfishness." "No," I said firmly, shaking my head. "Selfishness would be ignoring their situation entirely. I've invested time, money, and energy into finding real solutions, just not the particular solution you demanded." The conversation continued in circles, my mother clinging stubbornly to her disappointment, while my father gradually thawed, a reluctant understanding dawning. By the time I left, we'd reached an uneasy truce. Not reconciliation, not yet, but perhaps it was a prerequisite. As I drove home, my phone chimed with a text from Daniel. "Sign the lease today. Kids are excited about having their own room again." Attached was a photo of Zoe and Finn standing in an empty apartment, their smiles tentative, but undeniably real for the first time in months. That night, I received an unexpected call from my Aunt Laura, my mother's sister. I heard about the situation with Chloe. She began without preamble, her voice surprisingly steady. I sighed. "I'm not surprised, Aunt Laura." "I am," she replied, a faint chuckle in her voice. Because from where I'm sitting, Eleanor, you're the only one making any sense in this whole mess. Her support caught me completely off guard. Really? Absolutely. Someone needed to break this cycle, and you had the courage to do it. She paused, then added, your mother won't admit it, but you did exactly what needed to be done. As we talked, I realized the toxic family dynamics extended far beyond my immediate circle. Others had witnessed the pattern for years, remaining silent to keep the peace. My stand had broken not just the cycle of enabling, but also the conspiracy of silence around it. By the end of the week, Daniel sent photos of their modest, but functional apartment, now furnished with basic necessities. Zoe and Finn were enrolled in the local school, starting after winter break. Daniel had secured his construction job permanently, with potential for advancement. Chloe was still adjusting, her social media now conspicuously quiet, but she was investigating part-time work options. The situation remained fragile, their future uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt genuine hope for my niece and nephew's well-being. Not because I'd sacrificed everything to rescue them, but because I'd helped create conditions where sustainable recovery was possible. The hardest lesson proved to be the most valuable. Sometimes true support means standing firm rather than giving way. 3 months passed. Winter yielded to early spring, both in Chicago's lakefront and, tentatively, in my family relationships. The apartment in Nevada had become a real home for Zoe and Finn. Their bedroom walls now displayed colorful artwork and school certificates rather than Instagram-worthy landscapes. Daniel had received a promotion at the construction company, moving from general labor to a position that utilized his electrical skills, a significant step forward. Chloe's adjustment proved more difficult. Her initial resentment manifested as passive-aggressive social media posts about temporary setbacks and dreams deferred. But reality, as it always does, has a way of asserting itself. As the children thrived in their renewed stability, as finances slowly, painstakingly improved, even Chloe began acknowledging the undeniable benefits of their new situation. Zoe got Student of the Month. She texted me unexpectedly one afternoon, attaching a photo of my niece holding a certificate, beaming with pride. No commentary about constraints or settling, just simple, pure maternal pride. Small steps. Fragile progress. My relationship with my parents evolved through uncomfortable, but ultimately necessary conversations. My father came around first, calling one evening to discuss his retirement portfolio, his financial questions his awkward way of extending an olive branch. You were right, Eleanor, he admitted, his voice low, almost ashamed, after we'd reviewed his investments and the conversation inevitably turned to Chloe's situation. We were enabling, not helping. It's a difficult line to see when you love someone, I offered, giving him a grace I hadn't felt in the heat of the conflict. Your mother is having a harder time admitting it, he confided. But she noticed how much better the kids look in the video calls. How much happier. My mother's reconciliation came more gradually, a slow thaw. Small text messages asking about my day. Brief phone calls that carefully avoided mentioning Chloe at first, then slowly incorporated updates about the children's progress. The frost between us melted degree by painstaking degree. A breakthrough arrived in the form of an unexpected apology during one of our now regular Sunday calls. I've been thinking about what you said, Eleanor, my mother began hesitantly, her voice filled with a vulnerability I'd rarely heard. About support versus enabling. About how boundaries can be a form of love. I waited, sensing more to come. Your grandmother did the same thing with me that I've done with Chloe, she continued, her voice heavy with regret. Always made excuses, always cleaned up my messes. It took me years to learn responsibility because there were never any consequences. She paused, a long, emotional silence. I didn't see the pattern repeating until you forced me to look at it. The admission cost her pride, I knew, and I recognized the profound gift in her vulnerability. Thank you for telling me that, Mom. I'm still learning, she admitted, a wistful note in her voice. It's hard to change habits of a lifetime. For all of us, I agreed gently. As for Chloe and Daniel, their marriage remained a work in progress. The Freedom Tour had exposed fundamental, gaping differences in their values and priorities. They began couples counseling, cautiously, painstakingly rebuilding the trust that had fractured so completely during their months of nomadic chaos. My relationship with them transformed as well. Daniel and I developed a genuine friendship based on a mutual respect that hadn't existed before. With Chloe, I established clearer boundaries while also finding new ways to connect. I visited them in Nevada during spring break, spending quality time with Zoe and Finn, maintaining an appropriate distance from their parents' rebuilding efforts, a respectful acknowledgement of their fragile path forward. But the most profound change occurred within me. Through standing firm despite the crushing guilt, the emotional manipulation, and the intense family pressure, I discovered a self-respect that no external validation could ever provide. The boundaries I'd struggled so hard to establish in therapy became natural extensions of my self-worth rather than defensive walls I had to constantly guard. "You seem different," Dr. Hayes observed during our now monthly check-in. "More centered, Eleanor." "I feel different," I confirmed, a genuine smile gracing my lips. Like I'm finally the author of my own story, instead of a supporting character in everyone else's. Thanksgiving arrived, the first family gathering since the video confrontation that had changed everything. I flew to Nevada rather than having them travel to Chicago, a practical choice that acknowledged their still recovering finances. The modest apartment was transformed for the occasion. A folding table extended through the living room, covered with the festive tablecloth Chloe had found at a local thrift store. The children had created handmade decorations that lined the walls, bursts of color and innocence. My parents arrived the day before I did, our mother having apparently packed half her kitchen to ensure a proper holiday meal. Awkwardness lingered beneath the surface as we gathered around the table, a thin veil over deeper emotions. Old patterns threatened to re-emerge in subtle ways. My mother automatically served Chloe the largest portion. My father began a story about that time Chloe charmed the traffic cop before catching himself, a brief, uncomfortable silence following. I felt the gravitational pull of my usual peacekeeper role when tension briefly flickered, but something fundamental had shifted. When Chloe made a passing comment about hopefully being on the road again by next Thanksgiving, Daniel gently but firmly countered, "We've talked about this, Chloe. The kids need consistency." Instead of backing down, he maintained steady eye contact until she nodded slightly, a quiet understanding passing between them. My mother, surprisingly, supported him. "The children are flourishing here, Chloe. Zoe's reading has improved so much, and Finn seems much more confident." Small moments of realignment, subtle but profoundly significant. After dinner, while the others watched football, I helped Zoe with a school project at the kitchen table. She worked diligently, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that revealed her sharp intelligence. "Aunt Eleanor," she said during a pause, her gaze earnest. "Remember when we lived in the van and I was sad all the time?" My heart constricted, a pang of sorrow. "Yes, sweetheart. I remember." "I'm not sad anymore," she said simply, returning to her project with the straightforward resilience of childhood, a powerful testament to the stability she now enjoyed. Later that evening, stepping outside for fresh air, I found Chloe on the small patio, staring at the modest view of neighboring apartments. "Not quite the Grand Canyon sunset," she remarked as I joined her, a wry smile playing on her lips. "No," I agreed. "But it has its own kind of beauty." She was quiet for a moment, then sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I'm trying, Eleanor. To accept this life, to find contentment and stability rather than constant novelty. It's harder than I expected." "Growth usually is," I said gently, leaning against the railing beside her. "The thing nobody tells you about chasing freedom," she said slowly, her voice reflective, "is that sometimes you end up more trapped than before. In debt. In a broken-down van. In relationships strained to breaking point." I nodded, letting her continue, offering only my silent presence. "I'm not saying I regret everything about our journey," she continued, a flicker of memory in her eyes. "There were moments. Seeing the children's faces when they spotted their first wild horses. Stargazing in the desert. Those memories are real. She turned to me, her gaze steady. But so is this apartment. So is Zoe's improved reading. So is Daniel's promotion. So is having enough money for groceries without panicking. Different kinds of richness, I offered, completing her thought. Yeah, she smiled faintly, a genuine, soft smile. I'm learning to appreciate both. We stood in companionable silence until she added, almost as an afterthought, thank you for not giving us what we demanded, Eleanor. For giving us what we needed instead. Her eyes met mine, a flicker of understanding passing between us. It couldn't have been easy, standing against everyone. It wasn't, I admitted, a ghost of a smile touching my own lips. But sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. Returning inside, watching my family interact in this humble, small space, I reflected on the journey we'd all taken. Not the Instagram-worthy freedom tour Chloe had envisioned, but a different kind of journey. One of emotional growth, redefined relationships, and hard-earned wisdom. The lesson crystallized within me: love doesn't mean an absence of boundaries. True support isn't measured by sacrifice, but by sustainability. Family loyalty shouldn't require surrendering your own well-being. And sometimes, the most loving act is simply standing firm when everyone expects you to give way. It was a brutal education in love and responsibility. But I have to ask, was I truly heartless for drawing that line, or was it the most loving thing I could do? If you've ever faced a similar crossroads with family, please share your story in the comments below. I'm reading every single one.